and their core of discovery to traverse the Great Plains. And in the course of their expedition, they encountered spectacular scenes never before observed by any kind of Western member of the Western civilization, that just teemed with a new kind of undiscovered life. Flocks of birds, so vast they darkened the sky. Antelope, wolves, prehistoric like bison, like these which you see here, a few of which remain at the American Tallgrass Prairie Preserve out in central Kansas. The North Texas Blackland Prairie is a 12 million acre subset of the Great Plains. It's about 5 hectares if you want to look at it in European units. And here's a wonderful kind of offering also about this, where you can sense how this too inspired moody and poetic reactions from writer Z.N. Morel. The Blackland Prairie is where I currently live, practice, and teach landscape architecture in Dallas. I know many of you live here also, but it's also, I think, more than just our home. It's a kind of rooted place that gives us a sense of direction and a sense of meaning. This is where I'm from. This is the landscape that shapes my view of nature, environment, and landscape architecture. To begin with, it's a place that starts ecologically in a very modest way, with only 4 species of grasses forming the kind of matrix of diversity for this particular ecology. But it goes quickly from those 4 in the sense that that 4 multiplies to almost 1,000, because sadly, the grasses have so been diminished by industrial and mechanization and so forth, that we don't quite have the diversity we once had. But in places like the Clymer Meadow in North Dallas, we can still see a glimpse of the incredible abundance and diversity that was this amazing sort of North Texas grassland. You're probably wondering, why in the world am I showing you a picture of the Angel of Progress? This is a wonderful metaphorical painting that was done in the mid-19th century. And I'm showing it to you to give you a sense of how rapidly this particular landscape transformed under industrial production, that it went from this moment here, a kind of moody moment of looking at mechanization, charging across the Great Plains, transforming essentially an industrial landscape into a landscape of mechanization, economy, and human production. Go ahead. Oop. This always happens. There we go. All right, back on track. But was it for technology, we wouldn't have things to worry about. So anyway, this is the landscape that I think fires the American imagination. If you ask an American where they think of the heart and the mind of the American landscape, I think many of them probably at least think about the Great Plains, either in part or in whole. This was, I like to think, our rainforest, this particular vast American grassland, which, interestingly was, somewhere about 4 to 7 times more CO2 that it offered to the atmosphere. We often think about, carbon sequestration, but actually the carbon sequestration and all of that CO2 production comes out of the American grasslands. And so it's very little wonder that when our firm won the commission for the Sprint World Headquarters campus in Kansas City, we actually surrounded that particular landscape with a belt of Kanza prairie, of a mixture of indigenous native grasses, not so much as a productive landscape, but really as a metaphor, at least in terms of what we were interested in at that time. Even though fox, coyotes, and shrews and other wonderful critters appeared in our kind of abstract Kanza prairie, this was not yet a rewilding project. It was really more an interpretive landscape driven by metaphor and inferences. You know, what you have here is a corporate campus that's rising up, you know, out of a landscape in a suburban location, even though it's in a city. Here you can see how the main drive for this Sprint World Headquarters campus, which was the largest construction project in North America for 2 consecutive years. This was when this particular Fortune 100 company was really at its peak, and they chose the opportunity to actually nest themselves in the landscape of their origins. Here's a view of the tree and maple lined parkway that surrounds the 21 buildings that also were the nest for the 15,000 corporate employees. You know, here we see buildings essentially that on the one hand appear to be corporate facilities, but are really on the other hand essentially venues for the proliferation of their identity in Kansas, in this location, and also for the production of corporate business. The metaphor, you know, yields to many different directions. I mean, this is a project that was, according to some metrics, the largest construction project in North America for 3 consecutive years. Here's a view of one of 7, I want to be careful about this, one of 7 quadrangles that were actually used as settings for corporate events, functions, and also for the proliferation of business for Sprint. For me, this campus, this Sprint World Headquarters, provided a first lesson for how to work with ecological plantings. And one of the things that it taught me is the simple lesson of make sure that you keep your own rules straight. That when you're working with naturalized ecologies, you have to be careful about playing fast and loose with them. They are synthetic landscape productions, synthetic ecological productions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're willful with them at the same time. You want to keep the rules straight so that the logic of the plantings are not perturbed or aberrated in any particular way that's negative. Here is a view of the main fountain, the kind of tome of the project that was a grotto fountain, actually comprised of 4 different bays. You know, it was actually seen as, and intended to be understood as, kind of the founding object, a found object, but a founding object for the campus. You know, and a symbol for where the campus origins began. What's interesting is after 20 years now, probably a little bit more than that, about 22 years since the campus has been constructed and used, the campus has never had to buy a liter of water for landscape. We actually used the grading, the shaping of the land, just as one performative strategy to capture water here with this wetland. This is an absolutely performative wetland, but it also provided a sense of economy. What's interesting is with all that after now 12 years, we've preserved somewhere around $9 million in operating costs. Everyone loves, I think, the ecological sense of saving the water and so forth. When you turn that, this is just something I'm sharing with all of you as colleagues, when you turn that to a statement as simple as, after so many years, the campus has never had to buy a single gallon of water for landscape irrigation, that tends to really bring a large crowd interested in the kind of things that we're interested in to your side. Those two defining sensibilities, the land, the landscape, they become the objective, what I like to refer to as the objective of our architecture for the land, our architecture for the landscape, for prairie space, that all merge here, as you can kind of see. Isn't that a fabulous shot of just the Kanza prairie and nothing else but it and the horizon? That's okay. That's okay. You're doing great. You're doing absolutely great. You know, here is an endless landscape. This is the landscape before the prairie, before manifest density and so forth. It is the prairie, you know, kind of ephemera that we kind of see that, you know, actually was the consequence when it began of 13 separate counties. This was all one landscape at one point. As you can kind of see it, you can't see it in this photograph, you can't tell where there are any geographical distinctions. So rapidly, this grew and kind of all grew together as one contiguous landscape. In the 1930s, downtown Dallas was known as Manhattan on the Prairie. There was just so many theaters and Broadway lights. It was just all indistinguishable and incredibly fanciful. And this culture that kind of sprang out of the prairie gave rise to original theater districts that we may have forgotten about at this point in the history of Dallas, that achieved international significance. Many people in Dallas don't realize that, like the great American theater and play Inherit the Wind actually was written and debuted here in Dallas, along with several others by Tennessee Williams and other writers, when there was this one moment, this burst of cultural significance that arose out of the prairie and onto Main Street here in downtown Dallas. While we're making progress still today, you know, it's a city that's, I think, still largely experienced periscopically. You know, in motor courts, we're driving around looking at it, at our city, we're experiencing our city kind of at arm's length through windshields. When you dig a little bit deeper into it, experts will extol that the remedy for all this, long-term anyway, is density, a phenomenon known as density. You know, building concentration is the remedy that will offer us hope. You know, what's interesting is if you just take that statement, that axiom at surface, then here's a simple question: how much density is needed? At what point does urbanism ignite, or do you just pile density on for the sake of density? Is it really only that easy? Well, we've done some very interesting analysis from the urban design side of our practice, where, you know, we just discovered that in some places, the density of Dallas, if we take the number of citizens there are, we divide them into the acreage that is apparent, on average, 1 acre of Blackland Prairie was exchanged for each citizen in Dallas-Fort Worth. In other words, the density of Dallas is one person per acre. It's an astonishing statistic. It varies a little bit from places to places, but on average, the answer is 1. And I can tell you, I have won many a cocktail after a conference when I actually asked the crowd how many people, you know, what the density of Dallas is, and they're shocked that it's actually 1 resident per acre. Here's what that looks like with all the different counties of Dallas aggregated together to form this phenomenon known as DFW. it's that many counties together. Roughly, it doesn't really matter how many there are. But that's what DFW is, as a kind of aggregation of citizens and so forth and residents covering those 13 counties. Now, when you see that and you begin to wonder about the lack of density, questions of resources, utilities, basically civic issues, before we rush to any judgment, if we look at this situation with open eyes, we begin to notice something that's really astonishing. Now, come along with me on this. In this view of downtown, this is the highest concentration of urban buildings, and it seems to rise up and out of what appears to be an open, unbuilt landscape. This leads to a really astonishing quality that I think, for me, for almost 20 years, whistled right by my eyes and ears. Come along with me and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Dallas is a city that is filled with wildlife. Our city is of such low density. We have a vibrant series of species that even includes essentially bald eagles, the symbol of America, living, nesting, thriving inside of our city. I'm sure you've heard about this. I'm sure you've seen this. I'm sure you've seen some of the species, and we take them so much for granted that we have essentially a city here that has wildlife teeming inside of our boundaries as part of our urban identity, along with other spectacular wading birds that you would never see anywhere else in any other city except for this unique set of circumstances. DFW is the largest city in the world for the trapping, banding, and the study of another set of species, urban wildcats. These are not kitty cats. These are actually wildcats. They're bobcats, either referred to by other terms, but these are living, thriving, populating inside of our city. And it's an extraordinary phenomena that I think we just kind of take somewhat for granted, that we actually have wildlife living next to us, cohabitating with us, negotiating their livelihood, their existence with ours next to each other. Right now, graduate biology programs are tracking about 30 sets of these bobcats with radio collars as part of a Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, which compelled them to rename Dallas Bobcat City. This is absolutely the truth, that in this documentary about their Bobcat study program for Texas, that they actually decided to name Dallas Bobcat City because of the cultural and environmental potential of this phenomena, which is obviously very compelling. I mean, you would never think, and this is really no small thing, anecdote, you would never think that, essentially wild cats are part of the raison d'etre of Dallas that can be identified and has been identified. I guess all that's left is just waiting for essentially the Visitors and Convention Bureau to catch the interest. It even kind of compelled 6-year-old Helen to make a drawing of all the wildcats that she found traversing around in her neighborhood. In fact, she found one that so charmed her, she made a crayon drawing of it and called it the Smiling Bobcat. It goes on from here rather rapidly. The entire monthly issue of D Magazine was devoted to promoting the idea of a wild Dallas. Think for a moment how short of a time it was culturally that Dallas, Big D, glossy Big D, would never associate its cultural identity with a wild animal, much less essentially a raison d'etre like this of a wild Dallas that is really permeating the beautiful kind of natural life that we have been taking for granted for so long. There have been several articles about this. This has been something that my office, Diane, and I have been promulgating, really to call attention to this extraordinary characteristic that is here. It's now. It's part of our city. We just have chosen up until this point not to notice it and not to really take something and make something out of it through rewilding. If this isn't enough, then believe the Wall Street Journal. I mean, here we have essentially their article about wildlife.
I think this one's the New York Times.
Oh, that's right. This is the New York Times. My mistake. I get my sort of East Coast magazines and newspapers mixed up here. Yes, this is one where I opened it up one day and I said to Diane, I said, look at this. I mean, here is an article in the New York Times about urban wildlife in New York and several other cities. You can see Los Angeles, you can see any of a number of these, Chicago, Denver. Oh, and of course, over here in the corner is Austin. Of course, they have to mention Austin because, you know, I mean, it's well, you know, it's just nothing, only good things go on in Austin, as everybody knows. So anyway, you get the picture, but I mean, this notion of really noticing the natural life is really quite extraordinary. We could just keep going on. Here's the Wall Street Journal, actually an article about essentially the natural life, the wildlife, new landscapes that have been quote unquote rewilded. And then that is a short step and intersection to the Clymer Meadow in North Dallas. And then if you're interested, come up to Diane and I after the talk, and we can share some of our inventories of essentially native species. This is just one that's part of an enormous rewilding database that she and I have been building as part of our.
This wasn't us. This was somebody else put this one together.
I know that. This is one of our students.
Okay.
So
okay.
Yes. So that's why us is that.
Okay.
So so that's what you're looking at here. Is just a piece of another level of research that we've been reaching out and doing as part of the rewilding project here in North Texas. Now we're just going to take a short sidestep, just to talk about some other enthusiasms that we see going on that are indications that this idea of rewilding is really picking up momentum. Here is you know, just an example of various species that demonstrate pieces and parts of rewilding here in North Texas. And then, as if none of that is perhaps enough to pique your interest, here we start to see remarkable things like in Oklahoma, where certain species you wouldn't necessarily expect. We're actually finding them planted out of in the enthusiasm of individuals who want to proliferate species of plants that don't normally come from these areas, such as Oklahoma and/or New England. Native plants are really catching on, and if they could be actually proliferated to Oklahoma and to other places like that, you can begin to see not only the interest in that, but also the problems beginning to move some of these species around laterally in ways that could be deleterious to them. Here's the last part that I'm going to finish with, and then we're going to go through a kind of lightning round here at the end. And that's just a simple project of how to do a pocket prairie, because Diane and I constantly get questions about where can we start? You know, we don't have enough resources to do a large conservation meadow or something. Can we do something smaller? And these pocket prairies are a wonderful little experiment that you can play with yourself, with your family, and so forth. You know, in as small of a geography as your backyard. Now I'll show you a couple of projects just to kind of pick up the pace and end here. We do at our office at Kevin Sloan Studio a lot of design projects, what you just simply say landscape architectural projects. And out of that is where we built our momentum for rewilding. We started pursuing lines of interest and thought, following kind of crumbs and clues from one to the next. And the Airfield Falls Conservation Park over in Fort Worth was a commission that arrived with a lot of its own history. For example, it was part and parcel of Carswell Air Force Base. You can't think of this part of the world without thinking about the military and the history of all of that air defense during essentially the end and latter years of World War II. And essentially, what we saw here is that at Carswell Air Force Base, when it was downsized, the inside edge of the base essentially went to the outside of Carswell. In other words, Carswell was so big in the beginning, it absolutely overwhelmed the landscape. But if you go over there today, what's left is just a piece and a part of that. And it left this one section that became a future conservation park that you can see by that yellow flag, that identification flag over on the right. And out of that came, you know, the downsizing of Carswell Air Force Base, came the opportunity to rewild this abandoned section of what was originally the Air Force Base. You can see the yellow line where that description was. A very small kind of geography, but very, very rich with culture and so forth. And this is what that area looks like. What we decided to do as a design conceit was nothing. We elected to not touch I mean, where else are we going to find a natural geological formation? This is allegedly, by the way, if you like sort of trivia, this is the tallest natural waterfall in North Texas. And we're proud to have been part of it as landscape architects. But it's a remarkable feature. The geology, I'll just, in the interest of brevity, won't go into it. But as you can see, it's a phenomenally intriguing formation. I'm sure it was rich with its own history of Native Americans and so forth. And what we did is we took the path that lines it, it's only a quarter-mile long, and we planted it very densely with rewilded native species that all were intended to attract pollinators and hummingbirds. That was the criteria for the natural program that we selected. And there was this interesting little thing, I'll spare you the long story, but essentially after we planted it, it looked very much like this. I got a call from the contractor, and this project had had a lot of challenges, so calls from the contractor were always a little bit nerve-wracking until he said, Kevin, you got to come out here, and I've never seen a problem quite like this. And I said, well, Joe, what is it this time? And he said, well, I think you're going to be rather surprised. He said, we've never seen butterflies like this. They're so thick, we got to brush them away from our face. I have to tell you, that was the one phone call I've ever gotten from a contractor on a job site that started off in one direction and ended up in this wonderful direction going the other way. It's now proliferated and been cultivated, and it's even thicker in terms of its abundance of pollinators. Here is the actual jet aircraft at Airfield Falls that is part of historical. Are we froze up? Oh, there we are. We were froze for a second. We always wait. Diane and I like to see how many of these things we're going to get. So we're still batting okay. So anyway, here is the main part of the conservation park. The jet aircraft, which is a kind of abstraction of many different things, as pieces and parts are omitted to allow everyone's fertile imagination to kind of fill in the gaps. This is the essentially this is the pavilion that was built directly over the foundation of the original base commander's house. So every one of those columns that you see, those white columns, essentially was marking the location of where the base commander's house originally was. And these are little tricks that I think demonstrate that architecture, when it goes down the road of conservation, doesn't have to be without conceptual interest or devices along those lines. Here's the aircraft that actually we abstracted and put back together. That basically, essentially defines the area of the project where you arrive. The right wing, actually the right wing actually is the wing that points to the waterfall. And here's a view, some very simple views of the many different ways. And you can see how it starts as a very architectural orchard on the left, and then it softens to a much more informal set of relationships with plants, ecologies, and also with spatial geometries. And so that is
Tell this story.
oh, the goat farm.
Yeah, tell a story about the goat farm.
My wife here, if you can't hear, she wants me to tell the story of the goat farm. So you can see the graphic on the right shows this green kind of demarcation. It says existing goat farm. And, you know, when this project was done, the goat farm wasn't there. I don't know if you've ever been to a goat farm, but I'm from Kansas and I grew up around them, and they're not particularly, they're not a perfumed location, let me put it that way, or they're perfumed in another kind of way. And so anyway, the goat farm was something that the client had a particularly bad reaction to. It said, we got to get rid of the goat farm or whatever, because, you know, we're going to try to turn this place into a park. And so that's what we did is we took what was, you know, an otherwise sort of liability, and through landscape architecture, turned it into essentially a new housing project that then relocated the goats to a place at another location nearby that would be more, yeah. Did you want to add anything?
No.
Yeah, great. So here's the urban reserve. Kind of we're coming around the final turn here. This was another housing kind of project that was made up of, mostly comprised of a program of very nice, luxurious, modernist houses. There was nothing extraordinary about it other than just the architectural attitude of the houses. Next slide. This is one of the houses that was built. It was designed by a remarkable architect, Todd Williams, and his wife, Billie Jin, who also commissioned President, well, they didn't commission President.
They're designing.
Yeah, they're designing the President Obama's library. Right. Thank you very much. And so this house is already finished. If you go out to the urban reserve, you can see it. It's one of the premier houses that's right up front. This is a house that used all of everything we learned up until this point of our career about water capture. Look at this. It doesn't look like a residential project. It looks like something overgrown, you know, almost non-deliberate in its attitude, dispositions about the architecture and the buildings. Here is one of the many modernist houses that are there. It's a simple cube that you can see. That stark contrast between a cubic building and something overgrown with other ecologies was intentional. And then here we actually used these Italian cypress as a conceit to conflate the idea of the kind of plants that you would normally see at a great European garden suddenly finding themselves to this place here in North Texas. And I think with that, that concludes my piece, and I'm going to give it over to the better part of this presentation. Now, Diane.
Yeah, I'm the world's worst IT person. I take a second here. And while I am trying to find the chat, I'm going to apologize for oh Lord, this thing. I'm going to apologize for the Italian cypress. This project was hit pretty hard during, I'm sorry, my computer's acting up. Oh, good Lord. Well, yeah, y'all don't want to see this. there we go. I'm trying to find the Zoom. The project was hit hard during last October's tornadoes. And, well, honey, I'm looking for the chat. There it is. And we have now redesigned it, and it will be featuring all native species. There's going to be some wildlife meadows, some wildflower meadows, and native trees. So we think that it has definitely improved. We had to fight the owner with it a little bit. She really wanted bamboo, and but we prevailed. So I am going to then skip through this real quick and get back to my part. What can we find? Oh, hi, Mark. It's good to see you too. And the first part of the program, I think we can, you'll have to ask Cindy if it's being recorded. It might be, I don't know.
Yes, it's being recorded. I was a minute or two late though.
Okay. So we're coming up. Our field falls. And here we are. So when Kevin told me that he was speaking to the Native Plant Society of Texas, I thought, well, that's really great. And then he said, no, in fact, we were both speaking. He had signed me up too. And I kind of pitched a fit and fell in it. And he said he didn't know what the problem was because I knew a lot about native plants. Well, yes, but I learned all of it from the Native Plant Society of Texas. So I was like, you're asking me to talk to my teachers, basically. And he was unconcerned. He said I'd work it out, and here I am. So I hope I have a little information here to impart to you all. So while we're hearing a lot about rewilding, we're seeing it in articles and on websites. But while we're doing a lot of talking about it and reading about it, it might be good to know, what is it? And that's a good question. And it might depend on where you look. For instance, when I first started doing some Google searches, just preparing for this talk, I came up with some interesting stuff. Rewild yoga, I don't know what that is. And rewild tiny homes, but they have a big impact. I found a rewild church and a rewild Italian site that's selling shoes that may have Italian style, but don't necessarily have much to do with nature, which I thought was hilarious, actually. But you can also find these fabulous and inspiring national sites. And they show that rewilding is sweeping the world. This is Rewild Europe. Rewild Britain. England actually has a director of rewilding that reports directly to the Prime Minister. And this is a wonderful website. It has a lot of information that can help us with our own definition of rewilding. Such as here, this is a definition with a national scale, talking about restorations of large-scale ecosystems, reinstating natural processes, and striking a balance, this is important, striking a balance between people and the rest of nature where each can thrive. It also gives us some principles for rewilding, which I find useful for a national scale, municipal scale, and even a personal scale. The things here that leap out at me are here, rewilding is a choice of land management, which I liked. And then working at nature's scale, which I'm going to cover a little bit more here in just a little bit. This might have been my favorite national site, Scotland. where human connections to the natural world are strengthened in villages and cities. Imagine a wilder Scotland. And this could all apply to the United States as well. And here was another Scottish site. I want to come home. And I'm sure there are, you know, if we were in person, I'd ask for a show of hands, but I'm sure that a lot of you are cat owners. And you can look at the lynx face here and see the same look on your cat at home. And it's the kind of combination look of a cat trying to look pathetic while at the same time conveying the information that he thinks that we're really stupid. There are also movements to rewild entire continents, such as this incredibly beautiful site for Rewild Africa. Now there's a concept, rewilding the cradle of human civilization, the human life rather. And I recommend doing searches and exploring all of these sites. They're just filled with information and images and films that'll just blow your mind. From a continental, Kevin says ideas, yes. And from a continental perspective, we can move to a thriving modern metropolis. Rewilding Beijing. Yes, Beijing, China, with its terrible air and its bad visibility. And this will surprise you, but there is this movement. It's partly to help clean their air and provide a better life for their citizenry. But there is this is from Birding Beijing. There are a ton of birders in Beijing who want to rewild the city to increase their wildlife.
And that's underwritten by the government.
Yeah, oh yes, and it's underwritten by the government, also this greening of Beijing. This year, Beijing was supposed to be hosting, I'm going to get rid of the group chat again. I hope I don't lose it forever. Beijing was supposed to host this is a mouthful, the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. The purpose of it was to outline some national and international policies to slow, stop, and reverse this astounding decline of species that we're seeing right now. According to the Living Planet Index, come on. Oops. Whoa, I'm going the wrong direction. There we go. According to the Living Planet Index, we've lost about 60% of all species in the years since 1970. This is a little bit misleading in that it takes into account declining populations as well as populations that have gone extinct. But we can hope that this conference will take place in the near future. Last year, Kevin was asked to speak at the Garden and Landscape Designers Association of Ireland. And they have begun a program to rewild their waterways and expand and rewild some of their parks and some of their highland areas. And they wanted to know what was going on in the United States. This is a picture of Kevin and one of our hosts, Deirdre Prince, in her natural wild habitat, the Gravedigger Pub in Dublin. If you get to Dublin, I recommend the Gravedigger Pub. It's old-fashioned and it is directly across the street from a cemetery. So taking rewilding now from the continent of Africa to regional to municipal, here is just what I think is a lovely local site. This is Rewild My Street from the UK. This site provides resources for neighborhoods and homeowners and gives them the tools to help encourage their wildlife to come back. And I love this idea. The question is, can rewilding be done on such a small level? And it depends on who you ask. Can we nail down a definition of rewilding? The word itself, as far as I can tell, was invented by Dave Foreman. Dave is one of the founders of the ReWILDing Institute and one of the founding members, if you remember back in the, I don't know, the 70s or 80s, if you remember Earth First. It was a kind of a radical for the time environmental group. This website, ReWILDing Earth, it's actually rewilding.org if you want to take a look at it. It has a lot of great information and it has an archive of all their podcasts. Dave Foreman himself did the first podcast, and in it he gave his own definition of rewilding, which is very specific. He specifically talks about large-scale conservation effort focused on protecting core areas, core wilderness areas, providing connectivity between wilderness areas, and protecting or reintroducing apex predators and keystone species. The shorthand definition for Dave is the 3 C's: conservation of cores, corridors, and carnivores. In fact, if you listen to the first podcast on rewilding.org, you'll hear that Mr. Foreman sounds a little bit bitter about the co-opting of the term rewilding to have different meanings. And there are cities that are learning how to live side by side with true wildlife of apex predators and keystone species. For instance, Edmonton, Alberta doesn't need to rewild. The city is on the North Saskatchewan River, and there's a lot of pristine nature. And the city has had to learn to live with the wildlife. They've had to because it comes from beyond the city and travels through the city down to the river. And this includes the large carnivores, the moose, the bears, and mountain lions. And they've learned to live with it by using and codifying wildlife passages into the city code. This is a huge document. It's about 250 pages. Parts of it are really interesting. I've read it. It's parts of it are, you could call it a little dry. But Edmonton also has tips and codes for how to live in a wildlife corridor city, which is very interesting, including keeping your cats indoors because they do serious damage to local bird populations, which is a thing with me. And there are other cities, including Davis, California, who are either have or are developing similar codes and guidelines. And I hope we see more of these as time goes by. I'd like to see some in Dallas. But for right now, in our city and cities like it, I think people are mostly afraid of the wild. And they're afraid of the idea of wild creatures and wild nature in their neighborhoods. And to get the average person to understand that maybe it's okay to start rewilding, that maybe it's okay that we can start bringing nature back into balance. And the way to do that would be to start in our own backyards. And maybe this is the place where we can start. Life attracts life. This is a quote from the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and it has nothing to do with nature, but I thought that it fit completely and uniquely with the idea of rewilding. The entomologist, Doug Tallamy, and I know that you all know about him. If I could see you, I'd say, let's have a show of hands. But I'm sure you've read his books or attended his lectures or seen him online. he starts rebuilding this intricate and delicate web of life that we have on this planet, just using native plants, which attract the songbirds and the pollinators and the turkeys. Like Kevin was talking about the butterflies here at our path at Airfield Falls. What he didn't tell you was that the contractors started complaining because all the butterflies were attracting flocks of turkeys, and all the turkeys started attracting bobcats. And so this was life attracting life. If you grow it, something else will come, and something else will come in behind it, and something else will come in behind it. And I have an example of this that is closer to home, and literally close to home. When we moved into our house, our little tiny old falling down house, the only native plants that we had were 2 pecan trees. This is one of them here in the picture, and an ancient hackberry. Everything else was plants from the 1980s. It was the photinia, nandina, liriope, Boston ivy, the dreaded privet. And our house and yard were basically what Doug Tellamy calls a dead zone, which he refers to as, always being the typical American yard. Well, since we moved in, we've gradually been replanting. And we've replanted with cardinal flower, Turk's cap, beautyberry, columbine, cedar sage. We have massive amounts of river oats because with all these trees, we're mostly in shade. And we've been rewarded over and above the work and the time it's taken to do the replanting with wrens, mockingbirds, crows, moths, bees, bluebirds, owls, hawks. And we're a few miles from downtown and we've got owls and hawks, rabbits, geckos, and this year Walter moved in. And I apologize for the bad picture. He had just been flashing his beautiful rose-colored throat at me, but by the time I got my phone out to take the picture, he was on the move. And this was as good as I could get, but he made this huge leap from our step into the Turk's cap that was just gorgeous, and we're very happy to have him at the house. So what is rewilding? We're here to give you guys a definition, and I don't think we have one. We're kind of working on it. But is it preserving and reconstituting wildlands and helping them get as close as possible to their original wild, pristine condition? Or is it creating a natural and nature-rich landscape where you live? Or is it, and this is a little bit of a teaser for next month, where we're going to really dig into this and give you the meat of why we should rewild, why it matters, things that you can take to your friends and neighbors who are like, I don't know, I don't want bobcats in my yard. But could it be taking an abused metropolitan watershed network and curating a program that will allow nature to flourish and enrich our lives? I think it's all of this and more. But we need to do it. And we need to do it for the health of our land, for the earth, for our cities, for ourselves, for our actual physical bodies. And Kevin and I hope to talk to you next month about why rewilding matters. And to just finish up, here is our office where we are right now, in the Kessler Theater, who is our landlord. And of course, we have to live in a building that's named after a famous landscape architect. And if you're ever in our neighborhood, please stop by. And thank you for listening. I'm going to do stop share here, stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to try to get the chat back up.
Do we have any questions for the Sloans? You can unmute yourself if you like, instead of typing in the chat.
I have a question.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Peter.
Could you say a word or two about wildlife corridors?
I can say a word or two, and that's about it. The when Edmonton is the only city where I've really looked at it, and they used to have them running through the city, but they were everything from a tall chain link fence to cinder block walls. They had a huge variety of different ways to channel wildlife through the city. And they put it into code because they basically thought it looked like a mess. But it has worked for them remarkably well. Plus, they know how to live with, how to live with wildlife. They know that you don't approach a bear. Unlike our friends who live in Red Lodge, Montana, who tend to chase after black bears with their cameras, or the people that we saw in Yellowstone National Park who were thrilled when the bison herd started crossing the road and got out to take pictures. But I think that they seem to work there remarkably well. Just actual paths through the city.
A follow-up?
Yes.
There is a wonderful example of what you've been talking about in East Dallas. It's the areas around White Rock Lake, which are so well semi-rewilded that we have an enormous number of bird species who live there either seasonally or year-round, including a flock of American pelicans who summer in Yellowstone Park and winter on Sunset Bay in White Rock Lake.
No kidding.
Yes, indeed.
I've seen the prairie remnants over there, but I didn't know about the pelicans. That's amazing.
Yes.
Pelicans at White Rock Lake.
Sunset Bay, informally known as Pelican Bay.
That's awesome.
It's just off Buckner Boulevard. You take the Athlone Poppy exit and go into the lake and keep driving, and you'll see a building called Sunset House or something like that, and you're there.
Oh, I think I know what we're going to be doing this weekend. We're going to be checking that out.
Now, the pelicans are gone, of course. They're up in Yellowstone now.
Which is where I would like to be when the weather is hot.
Right.
Janet, did you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to say that the entrance to Sunset Bay is currently closed due
Is
to
it?
road construction. So you can still get there if you come down Emerald Isle off of Garland Road, like you're going to Winfrey Point. And if you park at the bottom there, you're kind of facing Sunset Bay. But you can't get in that entrance off of Buckner right now.
Oh,
I'm taking notes.
Diane, we have one question from Linda. They're wanting to know if the airfield park is open to the public.
It is open to the public. It's actually part of the trail system. The whole idea of the park happened when they wanted to, and Kevin, you'll have to correct me, this is Airfield Falls. The question is it open to the public? Because they wanted to connect the hike and bike system to the falls. So they actually built a trailhead, and this started as a trailhead park. They just wanted to do, the Tarrant Regional Water District came to us and said, we want to do a conservation park, a kind of an example for people so that they can see things that they can plant in their own yards, which, you know, we thought was great. So in the area where Kevin showed where the jet display is, We have, did we do, what was it, Thunder Turf there, Habit Turf? Did we do Habit Turf? Or,
There was a, yeah, it was a habit turf there.
okay.
The Airfield Falls project was kind of a demonstration project of a number of different things. There was, it was a demonstration of how one can be responsive to history, the history of a site and so forth. And then how one can be responsive at a number of different levels. So when you go to Airfield Falls, at one end of the park sequence, you literally encountered it's a very cultivated landscape. It's a piece of landscape architecture. When you get out of your car and you're beginning to walk in the trails and so forth, and then very quickly you cross the creek and the landscape begins to transform towards a more primitivistic kind of attitude where it's just a trail. And then the last piece of it is where we did nothing, where we, you know, this in the area and the stretch of what is just basically a kind of trail that's touched hardly at all. We just let nature have that part of the trail for itself. And you know, a lot of colleagues, I think I've gotten a lot of comments, good comments, that they really appreciated our level of restraint to leave the creek alone. We didn't touch the creek. We didn't trick it up with conceptual ideas and the wrong kind of landscape architecture. We did all that over in other places just to show people that that still can be part of a place like this, but at the same time as part of a robust variety where the trail and the waterfall and everything was. We just kept our hands off of it. I mean, so many times the indulgences take over and you end up ruining something in the interest of art and architecture and landscape architecture. We just didn't touch it at all.
We have 3 other questions. Someone has asked, have you ever created a guide for development for developers?
That's a very good question, and we have the only reason I'm hesitating is because we have done code books that have to do with development codes. They're like little pamphlets and so forth that deal with certain you know, groups of concepts that can become a guide. We have not done. What was your question again? I'm sorry.
They wondered if you'd ever created a guide for development or developers.
You know, you can probably tell your question caught me off guard because that is something that Diane and I've thought about, that we've been kind of circling and orbiting that question of actually making a kind of book of techniques for rewilding and yeah, and so.
We need to do it.
Yeah, code book. Start with a simple code book. The temptation always draws you in and you want to do a magnum opus, and then you get stuck with the problem of you can't get the thing ended. And I think that Diane and I need to just dive in and get the basic tenets of this particular manual kind of hammered out, get it into publication, and then invite a larger conversation of colleagues like all of you to become part of this. Because I think it has to be the product and the contribution of many people, not just by the hand of just 1 or 2 authors.
Yeah, probably true.
And I'm going to skip one question to follow up something similar to that. Any thoughts on how we might get rewilding into our own city ordinances?
I think that happens through will, through guile, through building advocacy groups and so forth. But I think it really happens when you figure out the golden I'm going to make something up, and just don't anybody laugh too loudly here, but when you find that kind of golden application that draws everybody into the conversation, it's the idea that coalesces everything, almost like LEED was, several decades ago, that when LEED showed up, it was just irresistible to people because, I mean, who could say no to it, right? And so I think that what we're searching for here with rewilding is an educational step that moves it from a conversation that generally only appeals to certain kinds of experts. I'm trying to be wonderfully affectionate to my colleagues who just absolutely revel in plants and native plants and so forth, that moves rewilding from only that kind of identity to something that's much broader and encompassing. And, I think that this is a topic that is broad enough, it is significant enough, and it is already populated by talented enough people that it can begin to proliferate its potential, even where it is right now. And I think for me, it's a messaging issue right now where, like myself, like several other colleagues, we all love plants, we all love nature, we all love we love, zoology and all kinds of things like that. But we have to give it that kind of application, that defining application. What is all this in service to? And this is where rewilding gives you that jump. Rewilding is in service to turning all of this into a verb that actionalizes essentially what we're trying to do as an activity that reconstructs and rebuilds a new kind of synthetic nature.
Great, thank you. And by the way, everybody, that means you too. You're in the discussion of all of this. Someone thinks they saw in your slideshow instructions on how to make a pocket prairie. Was that online somewhere that they can read more on? I think we can just Google that. Oh, including how to get rid of weeds first.
Yes. Diane will follow up and post the slides about the pocket prairie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And probably whittle on that a little bit because that's a question we get a lot.
Someone is asking, do you think DFW would be better or worse off for wildlife if, and of course this is hypothetical, it in its population were the same, much more concentrated, or a high density city?
That's a great question, and I'm gonna answer it in reverse order that you ask those particular priorities. I think that the future for Dallas is not in a direction that is going to be about high density. And before everyone kind of, they pick themselves up off of the chair they just fell out of. I know that, and I am an urbanist. I mean, I studied urban design in Florence, Italy. So I am cut from the cloth of density and walkability and culture and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that there is a case to be made, and DFW is the place in the world to make that case, that there is a different kind of density that is beginning to take hold here, and it could even be more so given some of these convulsions we're having with the economy and everything right now, that urbanism and urbanity can be achieved at much, much lower density, that we don't have to have, pieces and slices of, this East Coast city or whatever that conceit and so forth. I often wonder if we should restate the problem of density something like this, is we should only have enough density that produces culture and walkability. And any density more than that is excessive and it's environmentally destructive. And it's amazing how there's so many things that get done in the service of paradigms and procedures and so forth that are bad habits. They're just coming from places of bad habits versus doing a project and say, what's the minimum density that we need for this project? Well, what do we mean by that, Kevin? Well, how about a minimum density for a simple walkable neighborhood? Let's examine that question. And then maybe, enough density that, maybe you get a certain kind of ecological return on the investment, but no more than that. You cut the conceit off at that point. And I think we suddenly can begin to see beyond some of these academic models. A lot of them are coming from the new urbanists and so forth that, dealing with stipulations and so forth, versus really asking the question and the problems, what they need and what they can become, and no more and no less. And that's the magic point that you're always trying to shoot for with, what we're talking about. Here's another thought with rewilding. I often think that rewilding, Diane and I go around and around about this. So you can imagine, yeah, here we go. Oh yeah, she knows what's coming. That rewilding is about balance. It's not about one constituency or one paradigm or one kind of, being victorious over another. We're talking about nature here and ecological systems, and they're all out of balance right now. And what I'm wondering about is maybe our task is to put them in balance. And that is the task of ecology, landscape architecture, and rewilding, is to find that perfect balancing point between all three of those, no more, no less. And over the course of perpetuity, you're just tuning up that ecology, a little more of this, a little bit less of that. Find the point of balance, and that's maybe what we're shooting for, with all these different kind of enthusiasm, shooting this way, shooting that way, and so forth. How about balance? Let's try balance before we go into other kind of areas of conceptualization. I think I see a hand. Is someone having is there a question there?
Yes.
Peter.
Yes. I think the basic idea of the question about density was, if the density of Dallas were much greater, the footprint of Dallas would be much smaller, leaving more land for rewilding.
Oh, absolutely. No question about that. Yes. And I think that could be, there's so many different ways the future could move on this topic. And one of them would be a much more judicious and surgical strike at concentrating pockets of density to relieve the pressure that's coming out of all of the sprawl and the more wasteful kinds of misuse of our land and its resources. I have only found my way towards a lot of this. Come along with me. I mean, I don't want you, don't call the police on me, the environmental police. But at a certain point, I started asking questions such as, can this culture be re-educated to accept certain kinds of very idiosyncratic kinds of things, such as, some of these density ideas that we have? Can we ever get there? And so with what Diane and I are doing with some of this is we're accepting kind of who we are, and then asking how much further we can push our culture to accept certain compromising attitudes about nature in a way that is realistic. Always like to come up with ideas that are a fit with our culture and not always a fight with them. So, but always open to the fight too, especially when the cause is good. So those are just a couple of thoughts.
I think we have one last question. The city of Dallas has recently adopted the climate plan, holds hope for rewilding efforts. Is anyone familiar with the city's plan for rewilding / restoring our numerous creeks and waterways?
I'm going to hand the earbuds to Diane and let her tackle that one, and I'll jump in as a power assist.
What is this?
It's a question about Dallas. We'll talk about it.
Okay, he handed it to me, but I don't know what the question is.
I do this a lot.
It's in the bottom, second to the bottom of the chat. With the recent climate plan adoption from the city of Dallas, is anyone familiar with the city's plan for rewilding / restoring our numerous creeks and waterways?
I know that some friends of ours went at the point where where we could go in and do comments. We were unavailable, but we did have some friends who went in specifically to talk about that and to try to add that to the climate plan. I don't know what happened. We are involved right now with the Coombs Creek Conservancy that was only formed about a year ago. And Coombs Creek isn't that long. It's, I don't know, 7 or 8 miles tops. But it runs through Kessler Park and through just a strange series of events. The Coombs Creek Conservancy found out that they were planning on taking a section of bank that had eroded, and the city engineers had designed like I don't even know what to call it.
It was horrible.
It was like 200 feet of riprap and gabion walls, and it was just a big engineering marvel that was quite ugly and destructive. And we got them to make it better. I think that community involvement has got to be part of this. But I don't know if it's being codified in the climate plan. We did find out that there's 5 more of these beauties planned for Coombs Creek, and hopefully we're early enough to get a more environmentally sensitive solution to erosion along the creek bank. We found out that they had not involved the environmental office. So I don't know if any of you know Susan Alvarez with the environmental office, but we got her involved, and she's helping with that. But the city the city engineering office had just gone behind everyone's back, really, the neighborhoods, and the environmental office, to design highly engineered solutions. Hopefully something will get into the new climate plan.
Yeah. And
Peter,
I see your hand being held up. I'm going to let Diane jump back in here to add to whatever your question is, but I can tell all of you, my colleagues on this call, that Diane's involvement, which started the ball rolling, the snowball rolling, has been remarkable in the fact that it exposed a real cultural vulnerability on the part of the city of Dallas. They were trying to sneak this, that's not too strong a word, this revetment construction, under the eyes of people that would otherwise slow it down, add environmental sensitivity. We just caught it at absolutely the last moment. And now we're trying to, and who's the council person that's helping with this?
Chad West.
Chad West, yeah, Chad's all behind it. Chad didn't know about it. Chad was caught off guard and flummoxed by it in a way that I'm sure someone got the dickens about the thing when they finally got offline and together. So there is some good things happening along Coombs Creek. We may not have caught that one quite early enough, but the ones that are forthcoming afterwards, I think we have an opportunity to actually improve. Yes.
Have you thought of trying to get Angela Hunt involved?
Angela is a good friend of our office, and we get her involved in as many things as she wants to be involved in. She's been working with us on, we'll be, in July, we'll be talking to you a little bit about our pipe dream of rewilding the entire Trinity watershed. And she's been very interested in that and involved with us here
Good.
locally.
Good. I think that's all the questions we have for now. Thank you so much, guys. We're really looking forward to July.
We're looking forward to July too.